Chapter 6. The Storm. Ellen tossed and turned in a sea of angry spume, her boat thrown about on the ocean like a matchstick. All she could see were mountainous waves. The only sign of land was a huge, jagged lump of rock that towered into the swirling black sky. The whole world was drowning. She was losing her footing. The boat was being smashed against the rocks. She managed to claw onto the breaking boat with her fingers, her nails, her teeth, fighting with every ounce of strength against the dragging waves. Ellen screamed, "Help me!" but her voice made no sound. She shot up with a start. Her quilt was wrapped tightly around her foot. Her pillows scattered the floor. She had sweat on her forehead, and she could taste its saltiness on her lips. She wanted her mum. It took her a few seconds to remember she was on the island. The weather outside had changed from bad to horrific. A gale-force wind howled against the windows and screeched through the fireplace. Branches thrashed into the lanterns as if trying to knock it to the ground. The entire house clanked and shuddered and groaned. The windows rattled as if the ghosts of 1,000,000 dead pirates were struggling to get in. There was a dazzling flash of electric blue light. Ellen held her breath and counted. 1, 2, 3. She closed her eyes tight, drawing the quilt up around her knees. 4, 5. Bang! The noise of the thunder made her jump out of her skin. Then there was a crash even louder than the thunder. Ellen screamed and leapt out of her bed. She didn't care how miserable or terrible Gran was. She had to make sure she was okay. She raced down the landing and rapped at her grandmother's bedroom door. Nothing. She pushed it open and saw an empty bed. Ellen's first thought was that her grandmother must have gone downstairs to investigate the crash. Her second thought was that her grandmother was selfish not to check on her first. Ellen tried to shout louder than the thunder and the clatter of debris in the yard. "Gran!" she yelled. She rushed down the stairs and stopped at the bottom. The front door was wide open. A bolt of lightning hit the ground at the end of the lane. "Gran!" she shouted again at the top of her lungs. "Where are you?" There was no reply. Ellen rushed from room to room, throwing the light switches on. "Gran!" she yelled, hurting her throat. Another bolt of lightning slashed the sky, closer now and even more threatening. Ellen saw a face in the gloom and screamed. Oh, she came to her senses. It was her own face in the mirror. She needed to calm down. She needed to breathe. Boom! A stupendous bolt of lightning, followed by a violent roll of thunder, made her heart race. Ellen bit her lip to prevent herself from screaming again. She was going to have to go outside. Gran was nowhere to be seen. Of all the stupid things to do, Ellen raged. Going out into a storm all alone? What was she thinking? She shrugged her mackintosh on. She considered her Wellingtons, but nobody can run properly in wellies, no matter how hard they try. So she put on her normal shoes, scratching the back of her heel. There was no time to search for a torch, and she had no idea where to start looking. Ellen grabbed her map and dashed out into the spiteful night. If things had seemed bad from the inside, outside they were worse. Trees had been wrenched up by the wind. Their roots stuck up into the air like skeleton fingers. Lightning flashes split the sky and made the world look like an old-fashioned negative she'd once seen in a museum. Ellen sped down the pitch-black lane. The track was alive with water and mud. The current dragged at her feet, splashed up her legs, pulled at her. The rain was torrential, and it only took seconds for her map to be drenched. As it was way too dark to read it anyway, she stuffed it into the pool of water collecting in her pocket and kept on running. "Think, Ellen, think!" she shouted out loud. Her voice was swallowed by the gale. She imagined it hurtling across the sea and hammering against the shutters of Aberglad. The lighthouse swept the road, which was more like a gushing river, in bands of bright white light. Ellen stumbled when the light disappeared and sped up again when it came back. Something was calling her deep inside, tugging at her memory and trying to make her remember a really important thing. She wiped the water from her eyes and stopped. The storm buffeted her from side to side. Her grandfather, it was something about him, she was sure of it. Ellen squeezed her eyes tight shut and thought back. She pictured her mother. Thankfully, she didn't have the sunglasses on this time. She heard her mother's voice whispering a name that she couldn't quite catch hold of. Jack, her mother repeated. Jack, Jack, Jack. That was it. The name on the bench was her grandfather's name. But her grandmother couldn't have gone up there, surely. Ellen knew immediately that she had. Anything could happen to her. She could fall and break her leg. She could be blown over the edge into the hungry sea. Ellen ran towards the lighthouse, its huge lens a giant cyclops eye, roaming the pitch-black night, searching for prey. She reached the path down to the bench. It was completely dark and even more terrifying than she remembered. Adrenaline pumped through her. She could slip and be dashed to smithereens on the cliffs below. Using the beam from the lighthouse, she tried to be as safe as she possibly could. She stood like a statue when it was dark and moved as swiftly as possible when the beams came around again. Soon she was out of range of the lighthouse and had to feel her way along the path in complete darkness. "Gran!" Ellen shouted, even though the roar of the waves on the rock below was deafening and she knew there was no hope of her being heard. Another fork of lightning split the night, and suddenly Ellen could see her grandmother against the swallowing sky, her hair tugging at her skull in the wind, her hands raised to the clouds. "Jack!" her grandmother cried. Ellen raced to her and threw her arms around her. "What are you doing up here?" she yelled. Her voice was drowned out. Gran sank into her arms like a rag doll. Ellen had to struggle to support her. "Pull yourself together," Ellen yelled. Her grandmother leaned so hard against her that she threatened to topple them both over the edge. Ellen grabbed Gran's elbow and dragged her firmly back towards the lighthouse. The woman put up no fight. All the energy had drained out of her fragile body. It took an eternity to lead her back, but eventually Ellen could make out the lights she had left on in the lanterns. She managed to get her inside and up to her bedroom. They were both soaked through and shivering. "Turn out the lights!" Gran shrieked, almost scaring Ellen out of her wits. "Okay, calm down," Ellen said. "I'll turn out the lights and you put some warm clothes on." Ellen ran about the house, switching out the lights, and then rushed to dry herself and change before she got hypothermia. When she went back to her grandmother's bedroom, the old woman was lying on the bed, mumbling. "Lost at sea," she mumbled fretfully. "Never light the lanterns." In her hand, she clutched the beautiful box. Ellen stroked her grandmother's head until she finally began to calm down. Her grandmother looked sadly at Ellen. "They didn't want to leave you. You know that, don't you? They're trying to get work. They had no choice." She drifted off into a doze. Ellen wondered what she meant. Who hadn't wanted to leave her? Who had to work? As she examined Gran's face, looking for similarities to her mother, she realised. Her parents had gone abroad to find work, not on a holiday. They didn't want Ellen to worry, and they must feel guilty about leaving her. Ellen knew that money was short and they'd been arguing about it. She slotted the pieces of the unhappy puzzle together as her grandmother slept, her hair curling as it dried. When she was properly asleep, the box slipped from her fingers. Ellen picked it up. She felt absolutely wretched that she'd had such nasty thoughts about her mum and dad. They could have told her the truth, but they must have thought she was too young to understand. She felt sad and useless. She rubbed her fingers over the box, wondering what was inside. She was fed up of secrets. It wasn't exactly the right thing to do, but she might have saved her grandmother's life, and perhaps she deserved a small reward. It couldn't do any harm. Ellen held her breath and unhooked the elaborate clasp. There was nothing inside but a bunch of boring old photographs. Disappointed, Ellen flicked through them silently. What made them so special that her grandmother had to keep them a secret? Old people were so weird. As if she could hear Ellen's thoughts, Gran rolled over with a loud sigh. Startled, Ellen dropped the photographs all over the floor. She was putting them back when she noticed that one had writing on it. Growing life and magic true, of beauteous lights of fire. Love's treasures then will come to you, deliver heart's desire. It was signed in old style script. Blackbeard. A tiny spark of hope flickered inside Ellen. Perhaps there was treasure. This photograph had practically fallen into her lap, and it seemed to be a clue to something. What if she could find it? What if she found some wonderful gold or jewels, and her parents' money worries were solved, and they wouldn't have to work away from home? If only she could work out the meaning of the rhyme. It must be a clue to somewhere on the island. She needed to find it, and then perhaps, just perhaps, her family would be rich beyond their wildest dreams. Ellen placed the box on the bedside table, but she kept the photograph. She knew that stealing was wrong, but this was only borrowing. Ellen was going to find the treasure if it was the last thing she did.